and still painful for your eyes. So I will speak at the same time while I'm trying to fix this amazing changes. But yeah, like I'm Damien, as you understood that. Yes, I'm a designer. Just a quick story on that. Like if I decided at one point to stop doing engineering, it's because I care about something called HTML and CSS. And unfortunately in our industry, not a lot of people are caring about that. So that's, yeah, was part of a lot of my frustrations for a lot of time. And that's why I decided that design was an amazing thing to do. And then I worked with designers. And I was like, maybe not so bad. So that's how I end up working on design system and accessibility. And it's great, like its name, let's create a good testing strategy. But in fact, it's a revamp of a talk that I've done in the past called The Good, the Bad, and especially the Frustrated Unicorn. First, because there is never enough unicorns in life. Also because as a queer person, I have to like unicorns. It's part of the contract. And because it's matching quite well with accessibility. Because like finding accessible website is like looking for unicorns. You will never find one. So if I like to discuss this topic, it's because when I'm asking people, usually in conferences, do you want to make accessible websites? Are you interested about that? People are always like, yes, of course. Like there is nobody that wants. There is some people, but not everybody wants to exclude people just by default. But when I'm asking people after, okay, great, you want to make accessible websites. Why are we still having this existing? So it's an image explaining to people that if you want to enter this location with a wheelchair, we kindly ask you to ask at the counter for the ramp. There is an issue somewhere. The intent is there. It's kind of amazing, but yeah, like you have to ask. Great. And we're doing the same with all our web experiences. So basically, we're doing the same with design systems. We're having like a lot of information. We're having a lot of components. We're playing with a lot of information. And usually, even when it's existing, like for example, color contrasts, people are not using it. So that's why I'm here. Hi. I'm Damien, so I'm a queer designer who codes. That's the last tentative that I had to explain what I'm doing with my days. But basically, I'm trying to make accessibility accessible, and that's really hard work. So I'm working for Castor in Amsterdam as doing things with design system, and we're hiring. So if you're liking HTML, CSS, and doing accessibility, like I'm really looking forward to discuss with you. And my pronouns are they, them for future purpose. And one last thing before, I'm sorry, I'm really bad with timing either way, so I will try to fit in 30 minutes. But first, just a really quick disclaimer. Please don't be this guy. It's not only about the asking awkward question after the talks to people, because don't just ask awkward question. And also, if you want to ask me questions, please feel free. I love questions. Just don't start with, I'm sorry, I will be this guy. True story. So when it's starting like this, usually I just don't want to answer. And this is related to the fact that I love to crush dreams. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about frustration. Let's talk about design systems and accessibility. With the first reality check, usually when you start like looking for design systems, you're finding this kind of bullshit. So this is like a real template that you can download for a design system in Sketch that will help you like design new products, and it's absolutely bullshit because like you will never be able to use that in your product. First, because your design system needs to be tailored to your product, to your audience, but also to the goal that you're trying to achieve. And because, like, nothing is as cute as this. Like, I don't know like how it is at your work, but even with the best intent, like, you will never make something as cute as this. So, crushing dreams. But also because if you want especially to make your design system accessible, you have to take care of something which is, and to take in consideration the fact that accessibility is complex. It is, and there is no way to make it simple. We can try to like ease the work on that. We can try to do the first 30%, and the first 30% is already like a huge improvement because most of the web is not even doing this, but accessibility is complex. And it's complex because of one thing. There is no good answer. You can be inaccessible, and there is a lot of answers on how to be inaccessible. There is no good answer on how to be accessible. First, because it's 4 different axes. You can have like motor disability, you can have like hearing disabilities, you can have vision impairment, or you can have like cognition-related impairment. And just the last one, for example, between someone with autism, with ADHD, someone having a stroke, okay, not while having the stroke, but after a stroke, while recovering, all of this will impact differently your navigation, the way you're using the web. And in the end, like, we cannot have solutions working for everybody. Good example, contrast. Having a good contrast is important, right? Like, we're repeating this all the time. Contrast, 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 contrast. But if you're trying to make websites for people with autism, for example, that's something that you have to be really careful with, because it can create the exact opposite effect. Less readable, and can trigger some really big annoyance for the users. So accessibility is complex. And even if a lot of time I can hear people saying that, yeah, but we have a design system. It will help us being more accessible. No, it will not. Like, having a design system will not magically make your designs and make your code accessible. But it can help you make it at least making at least the work a bit less complex. But the thing is, a good code can't make a bad design accessible. If there is no good contrast, it will not be accessible. If like you have annoying buttons that are not visible as buttons, yeah, you can do a really good code. It will not be accessible. But for designers, the thing is, a good design cannot make a bad content accessible. If your content is shit, which is most of the time the case, you will not make the experience accessible, because content is maybe the most important part of the accessibility, what you will bring as an information. And the thing is, even with really good content, shitty IDs are shitty IDs. And an ID which is excluding people will continue to exclude people. Uber is a shitty ID. Having an ID of bringing people, like taking people on like the corner of a street with someone that you don't know, in a car that you don't know, with the information of where you're living and what's your name, I'm sorry, but that's an ID of white dude. Because like, you will not, as an LGBT person or a woman, want to go in a car of someone that you don't know, having your address and your name. It's the same with accessibility. A lot of our IDs are just not caring at all about this element. We're just building things without caring about how people could use it. And how people could use and how people can use things is accessibility. So even with accessible components, you can easily mess everything. And I'm done with ranting. It was a big rant. It's maybe something I like to do the most in my life, but I need to stop at one point. But one last point. Stop considering that you can fix accessibility later. Fixing accessibility later, most of the time, means rebuilding everything. There is no quick fixes on something messy and shitty in your code. The only way, usually, is to rebuild it. Example with navigations. Amazing navigation, usually. Like, people goes in all direction. Yeah, why do I need div? Like, why do I need buttons? I can do div. Divs everywhere. And in the end, you have to rebuild everything, because you have to use navs, you have to use button or link. You have to think about, in this case, how can you give the router to an external library? So rebuilding also the way your API for the design system is discussing with your product. So in the end, you're rebuilding everything. You lost your time. So stop considering fixing accessibility later. You have to fix it from start. So let's do a test. If you have on your products any user-generated content, even if you have like teammates trained on accessibility, if, let's say, people took care of the color palette, and you have assistive technologies, like you have people knowing how to use VoiceOver on your Mac, and you don't have stakeholders, because stakeholders are always a pain in the ass. So you don't have them, you don't have user-generated content, and you have everything else. Even with this amazing scenario, you're doomed, definitely. But we have solutions. The first one is the fact that we can think about the accessibility in design system on a component level. And the first thing is, it should be part of your definition of done. Like performance, accessibility have to be part of your definition of done. It's not, I need to ask more time to make it a bit accessible. I need to be sure that my PO understands that this is the estimation, but if I want to do the accessibility part, it will take one more day. No. That's part of the definition of done. A component not accessible is bullshit. So working at the component level can help you a lot to consider this and to make this as part of your job, especially with what we call the low-hanging fruit. So it's like this 30% that I told you about. And that's the most important step in accessibility, because this 30% will allow access to almost everybody. And the first question is, I love HTML. Are you using HTML? HTML is complex. Please learn HTML. The second one is, can you use your keyboard to navigate? And this one is always a complex one, because it seems really easy. I mean, you use a keyboard, tap, tap, tap. Is it working? Yay. Usually not, but still. But in fact, it's more complex because there is something we have to learn. It's using a keyboard is not just pressing tab. It's also learning when we're using what. Especially, for example, with assistive technologies like VoiceOver on Mac, opening a menu, it's not always enter. You can also use the VoiceOver command plus the arrow down, and it will open the information. The arrows can help you to navigate within the content. So you can do a lot by just doing tab and enter, but learning also how people will use the navigation with a keyboard is also really interesting. Marcy Sutton made an amazing plugin called One Day Without Mouse. And it's an NPM thing that you can install on your project, and one day a month, it's removing the mouse of everybody. No pointer event. Amazing. So I'm advising you to test it, because it's a good way to understand that your product is not usable, because your product is not usable. And also, what about the focus ring? You know, like this ugly stuff that everybody loves to do, outline 0. You can do outline 0, but please do something else instead. And this is something low-hanging fruit. We have technologies now helping us. Focus Visible, for example, is a CSS selector helping people to only target and only display a focus ring for people using the keyboard navigation. The flaw is that no browser is supporting it, but it's existing, and there is a polyfill made by amazing people from the W3C. So there is a polyfill, you can use it. Do you have alternative content for rich media? I have the thing that everybody is saying this since the early stages of the web, because that's one of the first rules that was part of HTML, and still we're not doing this. Accessible names behind this weird ID, it's like how a content will be named for people. It's not about the name attribute, but more about when it's not displayed, for example, the ARIA label and all this kind of information. And do you have enough contrast? Because contrast is still important, even if we have to be careful with it. The good thing is most of these tests can be automated with a small series of manual testing that can still be needed. And tools like, for example, AxeCore can help you achieving a series of automated testing without too much costs. AxeCore is used by a lot of plugins. You don't have to install AxeCore as part of your library. Usually, if you have just Axe, it's using AxeCore. If you are using Storybook, Storybook is having Axe within it. That's amazing. Storybook is already amazing from scratch, but it's even better when you're using this, because you can do accessibility testing right within it. It's doing it for you. And now it's smart enough that if you're changing props, it's redoing the test directly and giving you the new information. Use it. That's amazing. And it's so easy to implement part of your test. For example, this is in the design system I'm working with, the 3 components that are, the 3 tests that are part of all the tests described for components. One, which is the silly one, is it just not crashing? The second one, the snapshot test, because I love snapshots. And the last one, test alike, which is, in our case, just a wrapper for just Axe that we're using, but also using our theme provider. Because usually you can test a lot without theme in design system. But for the accessibility, if you don't have your theme part of the accessibility test, it means nothing. Because there is so much information depending on the colors that we will use, for example, or the size of some of the elements that you have to be testing, to test your different component with this information. And I definitely need to go quicker on that. So, Snapshot, great way to mix both automated and manual testing. For example, what I love with Snapshot is the fact that React is an amazing tool. I hated it when I started. Now I cannot live without it. So I have a love-hate relationship to this language. And one of my main issues is the fact that we don't see HTML anymore, which is good because I can do real HTML without nobody complaining because it's hidden behind my style components. But it also means that I have no clear way to check what will be the rendered HTML, except snapshots. Usually in pull requests, people are just like, yeah, update the snapshots. But there is really valuable information. I can see that my list, UL, is having only li as children. It's really important. You cannot have anything between a UL and an li. You can see exactly what are the different elements. You can see if there is a label that you really need ever. You can see this kind of information, and that's the best way to see that. Automated and manual hand with them. And you can also, I think really important on the component level, like trying to do tests for your own expectations. For example, I have a lot of expectation about my HTML. So usually I like to do this kind of test. It's a bit verbose, but when you have like a lot of people that will have to do the maintenance of it, that does not always have a strong opinion about HTML, understanding why some of the elements that will be displayed in the end as part of the HTML are important, setting some expectation on the fact that a number input required should be a type number. I mean, it should, but also to be required not to be disabled and not to have the attribute read-only, because I just wanted to show like some not within it. It's important because that's the best way that you can maintain on the long run the accessibility of your component. And one of the biggest pain with all of that is the fact that if you're doing this right, it will still not be accessible. Because accessibility is about moving focus. It's about what's happening when you're moving the focus, but also moving the focus for people. And this also can be automated through the test. I will not go through the whole text, code of this test here, also because there is some shortcuts. But the idea is you can with just easily simulate anything. You can simulate the focus moving, some clicks, and one of the good things for components is the fact that usually, if you're like working with enough granularity, you know what will happen. You know that when someone is clicking on the button opening a menu, that the focus will have to move to the first item in the menu. Because yes, the focus has to move to the first item in the menu, the first interactive item in the menu. And if it's done correctly with enough label, it will even give the name of the menu at the same time that it will read the name of the item. So all these kind of things can be tested and checked quite easily with Jest. And finally, let me present you a new best friend. You will love it because it's a really kind one, and it's all your it's in your favorite browser. And let's be clear, your favorite browser is Firefox because it's not a question. And Chrome is also having one, but Firefox is amazing. And this is the accessibility tab within your inspector. This accessibility tab, once you get a bit used to it, is providing you a lot of really interesting information. It's giving you the fact that, yeah, there is some names. Like here I can see that my buttons are account or whatever. It can also give you issues, potential issues. Like the fact that, for example, this link is having an issue with the keyboard because I'm removing the outline on focus and I'm using the polyfill. But the polyfill is still a polyfill based on a class in JavaScript. So my browser is like, hey, maybe there is an issue over there. Great way to test. It's giving you information about contrast. It's giving you information about focus, giving you information about name. This is the best thing that happened to accessibility in this year. WCAG was last year, so let's say this year. And the main flaw with that is that we're already discussing about components. And accessibility is not only about just the component itself. It's not just about having buttons and link using the good markup. Because when you have like really amazingly designed and accessible component, but you don't think about the whole project, at one point you will have this. So you have this button opening a door, and it's quite nice. It's opening a door for you. You don't have to open it. And then you're in front of this issue. Like you have a staircase. And this example is amazing for me because it is accessible. The button is opening the door. And it's solving some accessibility problem. People that don't have enough force to open the door, especially in a heavy door that can like stop fire, are helped with this. It's fulfilling a purpose. But the icon was still a wheelchair. And it's not really compatible. So you cannot think about accessibility only on the component level. You have to think it at a higher level. And because accessible component doesn't guarantee interface being an interface to be accessible. It's about the global experience. It's about the details. It's about everything. Your content to like the maximum, like the global experience of your page. And this about everything is important because you have to understand how people with assistive technologies will see your page. We have this image of people, for example, blind people that will use screen readers that will go through your content with tab, 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 tab. No, 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 and no, because we all have something else to do than like pushing tab all day long. There is something called, for example, in VoiceOver, the web rotor. The web rotor is taking all your page and doing a list of your page. You can have the list of all the heading, the list of all the buttons, of all the images, all the content being listed. And that's why accessibility is about everything. Because you need to make sure that this list is bringing an information understandable at any moment. Then the title is understandable without its context. So people can directly reach it. And that the order is the good one. The order. And that's why you have to care a lot about details while focusing on the bigger picture. And as I said, user focus, but also providing the right order. This is especially important when you have to move the focus between components. Like for example, if you take again this navigation, opening a sub-menu, you will have to move the focus from two components that are not going together. The item from the navigation, the submenu. And I've seen a lot of solutions where, because the menu is not appearing as part of the DOM at the beginning, let's put it at the end of the DOM. It will be positioned absolute next to the icon, which that it's working on mobile and on desktop. Hey, amazing, right? No. No, because you have to also understand that people need to find the content. You can move from one interactive element to the other with tab, but a lot of people are also moving from sentences to sentences. And if you want to go back to the menu with an element at the end of the DOM, it means that you were moved, like I'm taking you from your chair, and I'm moving your chair at the other side of the building, and you want to get back to this room. But the thing is, you were perched on the other side of the building. You don't know the route. You don't know how many events, how many elements will be on your way back here. So that's why you have to always stay as close as possible and moving the focus logically. So open it, going on the first interactive one, and when you close it, back on the button that open it. So what can you do? The first thing is automating a lot of this. Like you can automate DOM variations. For example, you can do magic. You can adapt the markup depending on the props that are provided. Like this. You know, buttons that can sometimes appear as link. You can manage to do that directly in the design system, and that should not be a burden for engineers. That should be a burden for the person that is coding it the first time, but never for all the other engineers using it after. So if you're like adding a target, which is a URL target, it's not a button anymore. It's a link. You have Anchor in the DOM. If you remove it, it's back as a button. Like this is the kind of things that you have to automate all the time. And we can also do a lot to teach people by forbidding actions. For example, in this case, you have a button, you want to add an icon, and at one point you will have the button without any text, and this amazing component will tell you, no, I don't want to, because if you just have an icon and there is no label for it, there is no content. Like, there is a button without any explanation. It's not visible for people using assistive technologies. This is not okay. So this is the kind of thing. In fact, we're using TypeScript, so it's not displayed like this in the component. It's an error in your console, but that's the idea. And you should try to stay as close as possible from the current position, always. One of the interests of that is also that if you do local creation of DOM elements, the list stay like useful for people. They can still like also navigate quite easily, and you can rely not on the context of the element, but of the context within the list. So it can still make sense. And ask core, one more time. We discussed it on a low level, but on a higher level, it's also really important because that's where you can see if if all the different sections are matching correctly one with the other. Do you have more than one main section on your page, for example? Do you have like ARIA attributes that make sense on the level of the page? When you have like these dependencies between something being expanded and something controlling it, and you're using ARIA control, that's the kind of thing that you can only test if it's working or not on a really high level. And then, and I will be able to accelerate a bit even more. Accessibility is a team effort. The first thing is you have to consider that HTML and CSS are real skills. Like it's something that people need to learn, and that's something that is way more complex than just understanding that there is elements. HTML is not only about the semantic of element, it's also about all the properties. It's about ARIA, it's about performance, it's about how the different things will interact together. Please learn HTML. And one more time, learning HTML doesn't need just knowing a list of elements. There are complex languages. And because of that, also as an organization, all our companies need to create an environment where people can learn more. If someone asks for a course when they can learn more about HTML, it's not a joke. It can be a real question, and it's valuable to learn more about HTML. I mean, prefetch for performance, it's HTML. HTML is way more important and way more strong than people want to believe it. Recruit a team of accessibility champions with members in all teams and all departments, not only engineering, because the sooner people discuss about accessibility in a project, the better it will be. So you can recruit a Stormtrooper with like rainbow on them. You can recruit people from all the part of your company, but please like find people interested by this and like allow them to have time to learn about that and to also be able to share a lot of information about that. Because these evangelists are the people that will be able to not always do the accessibility, but just to help people finding solutions and to help raise when there is issues in project right from the beginning. Diversity is important. Accessibility is as important because share the love of that. Like it's the only way to bring people around the table and to make the web better. And all the tests that we saw, develop and document information about that. Because a lot of this focus movement, click on it, test about the label, you have to know how it works to be able to do the test. But at the same time, the test is most of the time, like a lot of time, what engineers will see when working on a component. The fact that these tests are already existing. And like taking advantage of that, when people will add a new test and documenting what's existing and explaining why we're doing this is really important also to share the love about accessibility. One more time. Sharing a lot about that. So you can do a lot about that. And one of the things is about the documentation in pull requests, for example, asking questions. When people are creating a pull request for a new component in the design system that I'm working on, the idea is they have to check some boxes. One of the boxes is, did you test your work with keyboard navigation? Hey, usually not. Usually it's a strong no, and just the fact that the question is asked push people to test. Did you test with an assistive technology? I worked on a new navigation system, and even if I love accessibility, I forgot. I did a pull request, and I forgot to test with my voiceover. And then I saw the checkbox, and I was like, oh, shit. Yeah, even myself. So did you run Accessibility Insight for the web? It's an amazing plugin using Axcore, but also more information about that. It's helping you to audit. It's not only just doing automating testing, but giving you information about what you should manually testing next to it. And was it successful? I mean, you can test it and being like, yeah, like, I don't care. No, was it successful? Is there any limitation? And a question that I was to ask also is, do you know where the device lab is? Because like, if you don't know where the device lab is, you were not able to test with devices from the device lab. And like, less truly one, but a good question that I'm asking at the end of the checklist is, and that I think is a good way to empower people, it's, do you believe that what you made is accessible? Do you believe that it's compliant with like the WCAG AA, for example, as a norm for accessibility? And I don't care if it's not. I just want people to, no, I care if it's not, but I just want people to feel empowered and be like, okay, I think I did what I had to do. And I'm confident with it. And I'm over time, but I will try to finish quickly. So you have to document to have people to also feel empowered and to know if they think they did a job that is accessible. And the issue is WCAG is not an accessible document. It's about accessibility, but it's everything except accessible. So it's definitely not readable. And it's not readable also because it needs to be legally applicable. So what you have to do most of the time is giving context-aware guidance to people. You have to start, for example, with an accessibility policy. It can be formal, but the idea of an accessibility policy is the fact that it can help you choosing goals. What are you trying to make accessible on your product? What part? New designs, old designs, only a specific journey, like critical journeys? What? But also what's supported? What kind of browsers? What kind of assistive technologies? And what's not? It's okay to have limitations. If you have user-generated content, it's a pain. So it's okay to have limitation on that. You're doing your best. But just having a clear roadmap is always helpful. And it helps you to also understand when you will work on that, how you will test it, and what you have to test. So documentation. Let's talk about documentation. And this was a good example for me, because first I did it, and then because it's not only about colors. People can go on it, take some colors, click on the name, getting in the pasteboard, that's amazing. But also it's explaining to people when to use which color, what is usable on white, what is not, and in a way that it's understandable for designers and engineers. Because engineers will not make design choices, but you are the people with a terminal complaining because the contrast is not sufficient. So you can also be there and say, hey, it's complaining. Can we use this gray? It's not a lot of difference, but it's accessible. That's also the kind of thing that you have to feel empowered to do, because as engineers, you're designers. You are designers. You're designing code every day, and you are an important part of what will be delivered. So you also have to feel confident on the fact that if a designer says that's not your job, that's an asshole. It's your job. And your documentation should also document the support and showcase the possible states, like this. A design is not just like an input. An input, it's a lot of variations. On focus, on hover and focus together. When it's read-only, when it's disabled. Because yes, HTML is amazing. Read-only and disabled, it's two different things having two different purposes. And it makes sense. Like search bar versus drop-down, so many differences. This should also come from design. And you should always provide product-specific guidance. I mean, Atlassian is amazing, providing a lot of guidelines and a lot of information that I'm sure at Atlassian nobody's reading, because this page is definitely way too long, but it's existing. But next to that, there is something we can do to make sure that people are reading it. And it's really when it's not overwhelming, so not like this. This was just one page. And so not like this, but also in a way that people can just get the good information while working on something. For example, about the context-aware, Salesforce is doing this. You're working on the form, the information about the accessibility requirement, it's just on the top of it. It's in a box, you can see it, not the same design, and there is the minimum requirement that you have to know about it, about how it will work to make a description. If you have a text next to the form label, doing more information next to the form label. So this is the kind of documentation that is way more efficient than just saying, this is the WCAG that we will try to do. And to end, and I swear it's the end, just a set of tools that you can use tomorrow in your project. The first one, snapshots, I told you, amazing. I love everything about it. But just not sufficient on its own. But Jest. Jest is amazing, a lot of great libraries. Jest Axe, of course, I said Axe a lot, but Jest DOM, all the, to have attributes, for example, to be visible. To be visible is an amazing one, because something non-displayed on the screen can be visible if it's visible to people with assistive technologies. So to be visible is a really good one. All of that is available through Jest DOM. And use all of these into your unit testing environment so you can check also contradictory information. Because I was on product and project where people were okay, I have something, it's read-only and required. No, it's not. I mean, you can set read-only and required, but it's not, I assure you, you cannot be read-only and required. So this is the kind of thing that also we have to be careful with, because sometimes it's just two different people updating component at two different times and not removing information from previously. And your component in a design system should take care of that. If it's read-only, it cannot be required. So you're testing that it's expected not to be required. And like the last part of it, not disabled, not required, not invalid, because it's read-only. But with keeping in mind the fact that you can only catch 15 to 20% of accessibility issues. The rest, it's where you need experts. And accessibility inside for the web, next to just on your component, running it on critical journey, not your whole app. If you're doing an application, it's impossible to run it on an app entirely, but just on critical journey, really important. And working with atomic design principle. Atoms, molecule, organism, templates, pages, not only a language of designer, it's also helping you. Atoms are perfect for DOM-related tests. Everything that I show you about, like, can it be required and read-only? No, but that's the kind of thing that you can test. Molecules, amazing for accessibility test with Axe, because the molecule is where you will have the URL and the li. If you're just doing on a list element test with Axe, it will complain because a list can only exist within a list container, like UL or OL. Organism, perfect place to test how the focus is moving from one element to the other. Is it like working correctly? Templates, views, call this however you want, is a perfect place to just check the DOM order, section interactions. Is there a way that there is a clear difference between your main, your aside, like within your main, you have your aside, your sections, all this kind of information. And ensuring just, thanks to all of that, that it's part of your testing culture. And if you don't have a testing culture, which is an issue, it can also help you creating an extensive testing culture, which can help you on the long run. So in conclusion, it's fun as it's frustrating. And one of the things that I would advise you to do is starting with an accessibility policy to like offer ways to learn more through online courses, like DQ is doing an amazing one, to build a team of evangelists, to propose a documentation adapted to your product, and in the end, to develop a series of manual and automated tests. This could be your strategy to make a product more accessible. Thank you.